All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors. Thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Tishrei. To thank Zecharya and Sora Wolasky for dedicating all the Shuman Drashos this month in the zechus of refuah for Zecharya Dov ben Perel Shira, Shaindy and Avraham Kelman, in memory of their beloved parents, and in the zechus of those who need a refuah sheleimah. Dr. Linda Weinberg, in loving memory of her husband Paul, Paris Moshe ben Avraham David, Selma Woolf, with immense gratitude to Hashem and with Teffilos for health for all in the new year. Leah Sol, as a zechus to refuah for our daughter Ilana Bas Esther, and for all those in need of yeshuos. To thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Schwartz, in appreciation for the Daf Yomi share. Beautiful. Well said. With that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem. Today's Daf is Mem Vav 46, and we are picking up in Hashem on Mem Ham base 45b. And let's pick up actually at the 2 dots. So really a good amount of ground to cover today, but in Meretz Hashem, we will get there. So the Gemara goes right there. Discussion. Remember again, the general topic that we are still dealing with today is actually a continuation of what we were talking about yesterday, which is the concept of a kitana having Kiddushin without the knowledge or consent of her father. Again, I know we jumped the gun a little bit because I took you to the halacha l'maisa, to the Rambam, even before the sugya was finished, but I thought it would be helpful for us to maintain direction throughout this journey. So that's the ongoing discussion over here. A kitana goes ahead and accepts Kiddushin without the consent of her father. Ultimately, again, what is the impact and ramification of those actions? So the Gemara goes weiter with a variation of this particular theme. So the Gemara says as follows: Niskacha. We'll say so now a variation. Let's say the girl, we'll call her Rachel. Rachel accepted Kiddushin with the knowledge of her father, but then her father went overseas. And we'll say now what happened over here in this case is something very interesting. So Kiddushin occurred with the knowledge and consent of her father. Nisuin occurred without the knowledge or consent of her father. Her father was overseas, and she decided to go ahead and now do Nisuin. So what's the status of the Nisuin? Says the Gemara, Amarav, Ocheles Betruma Achiyavo Avi Aviyimcha. So Rav says, ultimately again, now we'll say, now it's interesting. So Rav says, assuming over here that she's marrying a Kohen, so Rav says she has the ability to go ahead and eat Truma until her father comes back and objects to the Nisuin, which essentially means that Rav says, the Nisuin works. The Nisuin works, and therefore she has every right to go ahead and function as the wife of a Kohen, i.e. consume Truma, unless her father comes back and objects. Look at Rashi, Ocheles B'Truma, so almost right across in Rashi. In Kohen hu zeh, if her husband is a Kohen, Yafa Pishalo Haiso Chuppah Zula Das Ha'av, even though again, the Chuppah, the Nisuin, did not occur with the consent of the father. For Rabbanon, Ein Ha'isha Ocheles B'Truma Achi Tikanis L'Chuppah, Zu, Hoel V'Kiddusha L'Daito, Haya Chuppah Nami Nechale Ach Nishmo Sheva V'Imcha. Now, we'll say, now, interestingly enough, so remember again, even though normally the halacha is a woman does not eat truma until after her chuppah, right? And ultimately, again, this girl had her chuppah without the knowledge or consent of her father, but we make an assumption. The assumption is that since the father was allowed or consented to the Kiddushin, that he would also consent to the Nisuin, and we assume that consent is present, unless, of course, he comes back and objects. So therefore, again, Rav says, halacha l'maisa, we allow her to go ahead and continue to eat truma until the father comes back and objects. The Gemara goes right. Ravasi says, no, she can't eat truma. The name says, Zora ocheles truma l'mafreya. Ravasi says, she can't eat truma. We'll say, why can't she eat truma? Because since there's a possibility here that's what? Father will come back and object. If father comes back and objects, then what? Then there is no nisuin. So then it turns out if there's no nisuin, then she was a non-kohenes, right? The zar, going ahead and consuming truma. That's a pretty big roll of the dice to take. So the Gemara says, that's the machlokas. That's the machlokas. Hava uvda. So an episode like this once actually occurred. V'chash la Rav lahad Ravasi. And ultimately, again, even Rav himself was choshesh for the position of Ravasi. See, even Rav himself, who was Meko, who said really halacha l'maisa, since the father consented to Kiddushin, we could assume that he would have consented to Nisuin, and therefore the Rachel should be able to eat Truma In the actual case, Rav was choshesh for the position of Ravasi and didn't allow Rachel, the wife, to go ahead and consume truma. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Rav Shmuel bar Yisrael, umode Rav, Rav agrees, shenei sa'ina yarsha. They both say, even Rav, who allows, we'll call her Rachel, in this case to consume truma, would agree that if Rachel died, her husband, right, would not inherit her. Husband would not inherit. So even though, again, technically speaking, Rav allows Rachel to eat truma, if Rachel were to die after engaging in this nisuin, that the father was not present for, that the new husband would not inherit Rachel, instead her father would inherit her. Why? The Gemara says, "Uki mamona b'cheskas marei." Because also when it comes to money, ultimately again we go ahead and we keep money in the possession where there's a chazaka. And since the father has the chazaka, ultimately again of that property, therefore we leave with the father. Look at Rashi. Umod Rav afagav degabi truma machzikin le bechazaka shenisratze bechupa hasam hu diinema lo nisratze achol nedaraisa. They both say, now, interestingly enough, I'll tell you this outside. Remember, Rav's position, allowing her to teach truma, is actually not such a chiddush. Why? Remember, midda oraisa, an harusa is permitted to eat truma. Remember, we've seen this sugya before. So what's the concern? The concern is, remember, since as an arusa she's still living in her father's home, she may take some of the truma and go ahead and share it with her family. But so what Rav is saying is, technically speaking, this girl, Kol Rachel, after she has irisin with a Kohen, technically she's permitted to eat truma. Okay, so now she did nisuin without the knowledge of the father. So there's no reason not to allow her to eat truma. So even Rav allows her to eat truma, that's because midaraisa, that's mutter. But Rav would agree that if she dies, ultimately again her new husband does not inherit her. But ultimately again, halacha l'maisa, we keep the money with the father. Incredible. We'll say that's case one. Case two is kachla das v'neisei shelo das v'avia kan. Okay, so we'll say, so now a variation of that previous case. Same basic premise, which is number one, Kiddushin happened with the consent of the father. Okay, Nisuin was shelo das. Nisuin ultimately again. So Rachel did Nisuin on her own, but her father is present. So as in the first case, father was overseas. That's shelo das avia. In this case over here, she acted without the knowledge of her father, but her father is present. Now, what's the chap of her father's present? Her father is here, which means he found out about it and didn't say anything. That's the underlying piece over here, right? So he found out, he didn't say anything. So Rav Huna says, Eno chalas. Rav Huna says, she cannot eat truma. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba Amar chalas. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba says, no, she can eat truma. So let's analyze this. Rav Huna Amar Eno chalas. Rav Huna says she can't eat truma. Va'afilu l'Rav da Amar chalas. I was about to say, even according to Rav, who in the previous case said that she can eat truma, hasam hudalo ise la'av. So I will say, Rav said in the previous case that she can go and eat truma. Why? The father's not present. The father's not present. He's overseas. But we assume that since he consented to the Kiddushin, he would consent to the Nisuin. Watch this. Aval hacha de ise la'av. But I will say, but here, in case number two, the father is present. Hay de ishtek. So, but he's silent. So I'll say, so remember again, she did Nisuin without his knowledge, but he's present. And yet he's silent. How do we understand his silence? Haydi ishtik mersach rasach. I'll say, why is he silent? So I'll say, you know what you see from this Gemara? Passive aggressive is not something new, right? So in other words, so what happens? Why is he quiet? So ultimately, he's angry. So instead of voicing his disapproval of his daughter's actions, instead what does he do? He remains silent. And therefore, again, his silence is a form of objection. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba Amar Ochelas. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, no. In this case, she certainly could eat truma. Why? Because even according to Ravasi in the previous case, said she can't eat truma. Hasam hu deshema yavo avia v'yimcha. But in the previous case, where the father is overseas, the concern was what? That the father will come and object to this marriage. He'll come back, aval hacha mi v'ishtek isnuchi isnuchle. But over here, we'll say, ultimately, again, since he's quiet, Steve, thank you so much. Since he's quiet, his silence represents his acquiescence. Silence represents acquiescence. And therefore, he's totally good, ultimately, again, with this marriage. So both say interesting. So again, in case number two, what's the fundamental machlokes? How do we interpret his silence? Right? So she does nisuin without his knowledge, without the father's knowledge, but he's silent. He finds out about it and he's silent. How do we interpret his silence? First opinion, silence is objection. Second opinion, silence is acquiescence. So both say, by the way, I'll just point out something incredibly amazing. What do you see from here? You see from here the danger of silence in relationships, right? Sometimes, again, people go silent in relationships, right? People deal with stressful situations in all kinds of ways. Some people yell and scream. Other people just totally withdraw, and they become silent. The danger of silence in relationships is what? You don't know what it means. You don't know what it means. And that absence of communication allows someone else in the relationship to make all of their own interpretations, right? Does silence mean you're okay? Does silence mean you're not okay? Does silence mean you're happy, you're not happy, you're angry? I say that's why, in general, in relationships, communication, even if it's intense communication, is always better than silence. Because at least if you're communicating, the other person in the relationship knows where it is that you're holding. Silence, at the end of the day, you leave room for all type of interpretation and speculation. Such an incredible Musahaska. That's the machlokes. Good, let's go weiter. Says the Gemara. Both, I'll just tell you, just so that we keep track of the cases. So in case number one, where again Kiddushin took place ultimately again with the das of the father, and then again she does and then father goes overseas, she does nisuin on her own. So again, I will say in that case, halacha l'maisa, the Rambam paskins like Ravasi, that she is not allowed to eat truma. Assuming she's marrying a Kohen, she's not allowed to eat truma because we are concerned that the father is going to come back and object. Case number two, Rabosai, where again Kiddushin happens with the consent of the father. She does nisuin without the father's knowledge, but the father finds that he's present, he knows about it, and ultimately again doesn't say anything. So once again we paskin like Rafuna, we paskin like Rafuna of Eina Ocheles, that she does not eat truma. Once again, out of the concern that halacha l'maisa, maybe the silence means an objection. So bottom line is, whenever we are not sure about the father's level of consent to any stage of marriage, she can't eat truma. That's the bottom line. That's the bottom line takeaway from this. Good, let's go weiter. Says the Gemara. This what happens again? I will say. So back to our beginning cases. She has Kiddushin without the consent of her father. V'niseis shelo das avia. So we'll say. So in this case again, everything is happening without the knowledge and consent of her father. So again, no Kiddushin, nisuin, everything happening. The father doesn't know what's going on. So the Gemara says, what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, Kan Rafuna Amar Ocheles, Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba Amar Eino Ocheles. So Rafuna says she can eat truma, and Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba says she can't eat truma. Okay, so the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says, so Kan Rafuna Amar Ocheles, Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba Eino Ocheles. Amar Ula, Had Rafuna. So we'll say, Ula essentially says, the statement of Rafuna makes no sense. So we'll say, so again, just to be clear, this is a case of where she's having Kiddushin and Nisuin, Shelo Lidas Avia. Right? The father doesn't know. So Rav Huna says that she could go and eat truma. So Ula says, this statement of Rav Huna, Kechomes l'shinayim uke'ashan le'inayim. This statement is like vinegar for the teeth and smoke for the eyes, which means not good. Now, we'll say, now by the way, it doesn't mean it's just not good. What does it mean? It's abrasive. We'll say, sometimes people say things that don't make sense. Sometimes people say things that are just absolutely abrasive. So this is like a real shtach. So Ula says about Rafuna, it's not only that I disagree with your statement, I think what you're saying is fundamentally abrasive. Hashta Uma Hasam the Kiddushin Daraisa Amrado Achla. So we'll say in the previous case, where ultimately again we had a situation where she had real Kiddushin, i.e. the father consented, but yet the Nisuin was done Shelo Das Aviha, and yet again in that case she could not eat. Remember again, Rav Huna said in the previous case where Halacha L'Maisa Kiddushin was L'Das Aviha, then she did Nisuin Shelo L'Das Aviha without her father's knowledge. The father was present. That is why Rav Huna said she can't eat truma. So now Rav Huna in a case where she did Kiddushin Shelo L'Das Aviha, Nisuin Shelo L'Das Aviha, and she could eat truma? It doesn't make any sense. So the Gemara says, the Kiddushin daraisa amar lo achla, ha'achla lo kol shekain. It's supposed to say top of menvav. So the Gemara says, Nirin divrei Talmud. You're right, Enachinami, the words of the disciple ultimately, again, seem to make sense. I'm about to say, who's the disciple over here? So interestingly enough, Rabbi Yirmiyah was the we'll say Memvav Modal 46a, first line. So we'll say, interestingly enough, Rabbi Yirmiyah was the student of Rav Huna. So again, just to go back for just a second, the case we're dealing with now is where Kiddushin and Nisuin both were without the knowledge and consent of the father. Rav Huna says if she's marrying a Kohen, ultimately she could eat Truma. Rabbi Yirmiyah says no, she can't. Ula says, Rav Huna, your statement makes no sense. Your statement makes no sense. Okay? Your statement makes no sense. Ultimately, again, so now, your statement makes no sense. Ula says, therefore, it would appear the words of the student, i.e. Rabbi Yirmiyah, who says that she can't eat Truma in this scenario, seem to make more sense. Nearly different Talmud. Amar Rabba, my Talmud Rav Huna. What's Rav Huna's logic? What's Rav Huna's logic? In other words, where does Rav Huna get this? That she could eat Truma in such cases? Like this is actually quite fascinating. Hol v'nasava ma'aseh yisuma b'chaya av. So we'll say, interestingly enough, how does Rav Huna understand this case? Rav Huna understands this situation ultimately again of a girl, bless you, of a girl who is performing these actions, although without the knowledge of her father, or I should say without the consent of her father, it's being done with the knowledge of her father. Meaning, her father knows that she accepted Kiddushin. Her father knows that she's done Nisuin. And yet, what has the father said or done in both of these scenarios? Nothing. So we have this concept in halacha of a yasam or a yisoma b'chaye ha'av, a child who is a yasam with living parents. What's the definition of a child, a yasam with living parents? Where a parent essentially is totally uninvolved in the functions of the child. So in this case over here, where Rachel's doing these things and the father, he finds out about it, and yet he doesn't say anything about it, halachically the conclusion that Rav Huna reaches is the father must be relinquishing his rights in his daughter. So because he's relinquishing the rights in his daughter, therefore again, her actions are meaningful, her Kiddushin is good, her Nisuin is good, and therefore Allah says she could eat Truma. That's how Rav Huna. Now again, I will say, once again, we paskin like Rabbi Yirmiyah in this case as well, that in this kind of, remember again, because we paskin in general, any Kiddushin or Nisuin undertaken by a girl, by a Ketana, without the knowledge of her father are inconsequential. Totally inconsequential. So that's how you paskin in all of these cases. But Allah Chamaisa, that's the Sora of Rav Huna. Quite amazing. Okay, let's go back there. Says the Gemara. Okay, let's go back. It says the Gemara, Itmar, Kitana shenis katsha shel dasavia. So again, continuing in the same case over here, a Kitana ultimately again has Kiddushin without the consent of her father. Amarav, bein hi ben aviyah chol lakit. So we'll say, so now we're looking at the other end of this equation. Let's say Kitana got herself into this. Right? She accepted Kiddushin without the knowledge or consent of her father. So now we'll say, what is the process if she wants to get out of this relationship? Okay, so the Gemara says, so Rav says, Ben hiyo ben avi yechol nakiv. Either she or her father have the ability to object and get out of this marriage. So as Rabbi say, without a get we're talking about over here, right? Just simple objection. I don't want this. We'll either go ahead and undo this from her perspective or from her father's perspective. Okay? Ravasi says, Avi avalohi. Ravasi says, only her father, but not her. She doesn't have the ability to undo it, only her father does. So let's analyze. So we'll say, says here, Ravasi. So again, we'll say, for us, remember, so we already know the conclusion. The conclusion to all of this is that the actions of a Ketana in this realm are totally meaningless anyway. Right? Totally meaningless. Alright, but let's go back there. Ravasi. So Rafuna is the question to Ravasi. Va'amri chia barav Ravasi. Others say it was Barav Ravasi. Im ma'in yima'in aviha. Suppose you remember again, the Torah is talking about over here that halacha l'maisa, if a woman is violated or seduced by a man, so the halacha is the violator, the seducer, has the obligation to marry her. What happens if the father objects to the marriage? So then inachinami, that blocks the marriage, and there's a payment that is made to the girl. So the pasuk says, "In ma'in yima'in," if the father refuses. So inni elaviha, so I know that the father has the ability to go ahead and object to a marriage. He atzma minayin. How do we know that she has the ability to object as well? Talmud Lomar ima'in yima'in mikamakom. We'll say the double lashon of ma'in yima'in indicates that what? That Allah Lamaisa, both the father and the girl have the ability to go ahead and object. Amar Luhu Rav, lo tezla basar ipcha. Rav says, do not go ahead and pay heed to that objection. Yachal l'shenuyi, I could go ahead and so again. So this remember is the kasha on Ravasi, because Ravasi said only the father has the ability to object. Now ultimately again the Gemara is showing ima'in yima'in, even the girl has the power of objection. So the Gemara says, Amar Luhu Rav says, lo tezla basar ipcha. Don't worry about that objection. He says, Yachal l'shenuyi lechu. I could explain it in the following case. Kigon shepita shelo l'shem ishos. Maybe we're talking about a man, a seducer, who seduced a girl not for the sake of marriage. And maybe that's the case ultimately, again, where either the girl or the father have the ability to object. But maybe if there's Kiddushin involved, only the father has the ability to object. I understand. If we had a situation of a man who seduced a woman, right, not for the sake of relations, so both say that's just seduction for the sake of relations. That there's no Kiddushin in there. So what's the refusal? Does that require a pasuk? So Amrav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Lomar Shemeshalim Kines Kimefuta. Well, no. It teaches us that Allah Lamaisa that even if the seduction took place not for the sake of marriage, the penalty payment is still paid. Amar Rav Yosef, if that's the case, Hainu Tanina, that's what we learned. Maharya Ma'arena Lo Isha Shetzricha Imenu Kiddushin. Pasuk says Maharya Ma'arena Isha. So this is talking about a man who seduced a besula. So the Torah talks about the obligation that he has to marry her. So the Gemara says, "V'impita l'shem ishos kiddushin lamali." But if he seduced her ultimately again for the purpose of marriage, then why would there be a need for additional kiddushin? No, you would still require ultimately again, even if he seduced her for the sake of marriage, there would still be another kiddushin necessary with the knowledge of her father. So we'll say this concept of ones umafata, the man who violates the woman, seduces the woman, we're going to see these sugis a little bit later on. The Gemara is just bringing it up a little bit tangentially. How do we paskin? So we'll say, remember again, in general, so in this particular case, where you have a kitana sheniskashal adasavia, kitana accepted kiddushin without the knowledge or consent of her father, so obviously anyone could undo this, but that's not really even a correct statement. Anyone could undo it. Why? Why? Because nothing really occurred to begin with. So kind of like our overarching principle is that a kitana who affects kiddushin on her own has done something that's totally and fundamentally inconsequential and halachically invalid. It's nothing. So the truth is, there's nothing really to undo. And we'll say, remember again, even stronger than that. What do we see in the Rambam? If you remember again yesterday when we saw the Rambam said, even if ex post facto, the father says, you know what, good shidduch, it's still inconsequential. In other words, if he likes the shidduch, that's absolutely fine. Then what has to happen? Another act of kiddushin that is performed with his consent. So again, once you have that principle, all of these other cases kind of fall into place. Beautiful. But let's say new Mishnah. Let's go back there. Ha'omer le'isha. This is actually great. We literally just learned this Mishnah in yesterday's daf. So this is great. Ha'omer le'isha. A man says to him, so Reuven goes over to Rachel. Goes say, not a ketana case anymore. Now, just regular consenting adults. Here we go. Ha'omer le'isha. His kachli b'tamrazu. His kachli b'zu. Reuven gives Rachel a date. Right? And he says, become mikudeshes to me with this date. His kachli b'tamrazu. His kachli b'zu. And we'll say, the lashon over here is very important. Become mikudeshes to me with this date. Date gives her date number 1. Become mikudeshes to me with this date gives her date number 2. What's the halacha? As long as one of the dates is worth a pruta, then ultimately again she is mikudeshes. But I will say if neither of the dates are independently worth a pruta, then ultimately again she is not mikudeshes. So I will say, bottom line, what is the Mishnah saying? When he says to her, become mikudeshes to me with this date, right? Statement 1, become mikudeshes to me with this date. What he is doing is, each date is a separate transaction. And therefore, again, the only way that Kiddushin works is how? If one of the dates given is independently worth a pruta. Let's say date number 1 is worth half a pruta. Date number 2 is worth half a pruta. What's halacha? She's not mikudeshes. Why? Because since he's giving each date with its own independent statement of Kiddushin, he does not have in mind that the value of the dates should combine. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, if one of the dates is worth a pruta, she's mikudeshes. If not, she is not mikudeshes. However, if he says, bezu, what happens if he says to become mikudeshes with this date, and this date, and this date, and this date? Then I will say what? Then halacha l'maisa, im yeshav pruta bekulan mikudeshes. If halacha l'maisa, she will say, because he's not making independent statements, therefore what? If he says bezu, then as long as the total value of all dates given is a pruta or more, then halacha l'maisa, she is in fact mikudeshes. Incredible. Vim lavin mikudeshes. But if the total sum of all dates given is not a pruta, she's not mikudeshes. So we'll say. So bottom line, let's just dwell on this. We saw this yesterday, but just once again, what's the difference? Case number 1, he is attaching a separate statement of kiddushin to each date given. Mishnah is teaching when a man does that, then each date is viewed as a separate Kiddushin transaction, and one of the dates independently must be worth a Shaveh Pruta in order for the Kiddushin to work. In case 2, all of the dates are part of one act of Kiddushin. Bizu, right? Hariat nekudesh asli betamra zu vizu. Becoming Kiddushin with this date. In that case, it's one statement of Kiddushin. The value of all of the dates combined, and therefore, as long as the sum of the dates is a pruta or more, then halacha l'maisa she is mekudeshes. Haiso chalas rishona in mekudesh. So I'll say this is an interesting case. Last case in the Mishnah was, let's say she was eating the dates as they came in. Right? What a great guy this guy Reuven is, right? Just give me dates. She's eating the dates as they come in. So say, what's the halacha? So in that case, she is not mikudeshes until one of the days has a pruta. Now both say, we're going to see in the Gemara, this third statement over here, does it attach itself to case number 1, or does it attach itself to case number 2? That's what we're not sure. It's not, because it's not an independent case, right? It's modifying, right, or it's commenting on one of the previously aforementioned cases. Is it commenting on case 1, case 2? That in Meretz Hashem we will see. Says the Imam, Man Tana Hiskachi. So we'll say, who is the Tana who holds Hiskachi, that if you talk like that, Hiskachi B'tamrazu, Hiskachi, that if you make independent statements of Kiddushin, that each statement is looked at as transactionally distinct. Who says that? Amar Rabbi Shimon. It's Rabbi Shimon. What did Rabbi Shimon say? The Amar Ad Shiyomar Shvuah L'Chol Echad V'Echad. Also remember again we saw this in yesterday's daf. That will say, let's say again, 5 people come over to me, and each of them claim I owe them $1,000. And I will say, what do I say? I say Shvuah, I don't owe you. Shvuah, I don't owe you. Shvuah, I don't owe you. And I swear it falsely. What's the halacha? 5 statements of liability. What happens if I said Shvuah, that I don't owe you and you and you and you and you and you? What's the halacha? And I lied. One bucket of liability. This is the wrong word, but okay, right? But one carbon, right? One false shvuah. So we'll say, so that is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. So Rabbi Shimon says, when you make distinct statements, so distinct statements generate distinct liability. In this case over here, distinct statements generate different distinct transactions of Kiddushin. When you group it all together, it's ultimately one statement. Incredible. So let's go weiter. So now we're jumping to the end of the Mishnah. So we'll say that last statement of the Mishnah. What was the last statement of the Mishnah? If she eats the dates as they're coming in, right? So he gives her a date, she eats the date. In that case, halacha l'maisa, the only way Kiddushin works is if one of the dates is worth a pruta. So the Gemara says, what part of the Mishnah is that going on? Is that going on the first part of the Mishnah of hiskachili bezu, or is that going on the second statement of the Mishnah of hiskachili bezu? Which one is it going on? So the Gemara says, ahiyah. If you say it's going on the first case, so my iriya chalas. So I'll say, who cares if she's eating the dates? Afilu manachas nami We'll say, if it's talking about the first case, so we'll say, remember again, what's the first case? First case is where he's making independent statements of Kiddushin. Become Mikudeshes with this date, become Mikudeshes with this date. So we'll say, so it doesn't matter if she's eating it or not. What's the halacha? When is she Mikudeshes? When is she Mikudeshes? If one of the dates is worth a pruta. So whether she's eating the dates as they come in, leaving them on the table, it doesn't really make a difference. She's only mikudeshes when one date is worth a pruta. Ela seifa. So rather it must be that the last statement of the Mishnah about eating the dates is going on the middle case, case number 2. So the Gemara says, "Vafilu b'kamaisa." I'm sorry, Ela seifa, vafilu b'kamaisa. So I'll say, so then it must be ultimately talking about the second case, right? The second case is where he said, ultimately again, his kachili bizu, right? Become a kudeshin with each of these dates. And it sounds like, is that saying that even if the first date, ultimate, look at Rashi, it sounds like even if the first date is worth a pruta, right? Then halacha l'maisa, she's mikudeshes, even if the subsequent ones are not. I will say, now watch this. Here's the problem. V'ham milvahu. I will say, here's the problem. The problem is when he says, Hariat nikudeshasli b'tamra bizu. I will say, when does he have in mind ultimately again that the Kiddushin should be valid? When he finishes giving her the dates. Which means, I will say, what's the status of that first date that he gave her? It's actually interesting. It's really a loan. It's a halva. Right? Why? Because he's giving her something, but the transaction is not complete until he finishes giving her all of the dates. In which case, that first date that she receives really has the status of like a loan. Look at Rashi. V'ham milvahi. Dekevan de Kiddushin lo nigmuru acha tekableim kulam. Since the Kiddushin is naturally complete until she receives all of the dates. V'hi kvar achlas harishona kodem shetikna osa b'Kiddushin havei zirishon mil gaba. They will say, here's the interesting. So ultimately, again, if she's consuming the dates as they come in, then really what's happening over here is that halacha l'maisa, that's like a loan, it's like a milva, because remember the Kiddushin is not complete until the final date is given. If that first date was the Shavuot Pruta date, and she's ultimately consuming the dates as they come in, and the other ones are not worth a Pruta, then essentially halacha l'maisa, she's becoming mikudeshes with a halva, with a loan. So the Gemara says, "Ela say vafilu becomes milvahu." Rav Yochanan. So we'll say. So see, you hear the problem. So the problem is if we're talking about. So we'll say. Remember again, we have an ambiguous third statement in the Mishnah or third part of the Mishnah, right? The third part of the Mishnah says if she eats the dates as they're coming in, so as long as one of them was worth a pruta, she's mikudeshes. That is not a standalone case. That is attaching itself to one of the previous two cases in the Mishnah. We don't know which one. So we'll say, it can't be the first one, because if it's the first one is every transaction is independent. So obviously, one of those dates has to be worth a pruta. So who cares if she's eating it or leaving it on the table? One of them has to be a pruta. If it's the second case, so if you can imagine, again, where he's saying bizu, so then what that's saying is, even if the first one is worth a pruta, and she's eating them as they come in, she's mikudeshes. So we'll say the problem with that is, if the first date was worth a pruta, and she ate it, the rest of the dates, right, the Kiddushin is not complete until she finishes getting dates. Then it turns out that if the first date was the Shavuot Pruta date, and she consumed that, and that was the Kiddushin date, then effectively she became a Kudeshes with a halva, with a loan. Because at the time she consumed that date, ultimately it was really only on loan to her, so to speak, it was a halva, until all of the dates were given. And you can't be mekadosh with a halva. So they're listening to this. Rabbi Yochanan, Harei Shulchan v'Harei Basav Harei Sakin Vein Lado Lechel. This is such a great statement. We'll say. So Rabbi Yochanan says, you know what? We have meat, we have a table, we have meat, and we have a knife, but we can't eat. Which I will say is an expression that means, since we have all the information in front of us, we just don't know how to make sense of it. What a great thing. We'll say, how much of life, what an incredible metaphor in life, right? How often in life, I have everything I need to be successful, I just don't know how to utilize the tools. I have the table, I have the meat, I have a knife. You will say, now you're thinking to yourself, oh, but there's no fork. don't be such a mifunak. You don't need a fork. You're fine, right? In other words, if you have, right, all you need is the knife, right, and get to work, right? Let's say it's such a metaphor for life. How sometimes if you could have everything in front of you, I have the table, I have the meat, I have the knife, but yet somehow I don't know how to arrange all of the pieces in my life to produce a successful outcome, even though all of the tools are there. So the Gemara says, Ravu Shmuel Amri Tarvayu V'olam Areisha. No, in reality, that last statement is actually going on the first case of the Mishnah. For Lomi Bai Kamar, Lomi Bai Manchas Di'i Keshavar Pruta in Ilo Lo. So let's remember again, what's the first case of the Mishnah? What's the first case of the Mishnah? He gives her a date, right? And they are transactionally separate, right? Hariat Mikudesh Asli B'Tamrazu, Hariat Mikudesh Asli B'Tamrazu, Hariat Mikudesh B'Tamrazu. What's the halacha? What's the halacha in that case? One of the dates has to be worth a pruta. So the Gemara says, Lomi Bai, what does that mean? So obviously it goes without saying that if she's leaving the dates on the table, they come in one by one. That as long as one of them has a pruta, the Kiddushin will work. Aval ocheles, hoil umikarva haniyasa, ema gamra maknafsha. Let's listen to this. I would have thought that maybe in a case where she's eating the dates, since she is getting benefit from it right there, maybe she's willing to commit herself to the Kiddushin even for something less than a pruta. Kamashlan, that's not the case. Kamashlan said that even though she's eating the dates as they come in, ultimately, again, since these are transactionally separate cases, one of the dates has to have a pruta associated with it. Or I'm sorry, one of the dates has to be worth a pruta. Rabbi Ami Amar the Olama Seifa. Rabbi Ami says, no, it's really going on the Seifa. Umay ad shehe ba'achas men shavar pruta. What does it mean? So what does it mean? Ultimately, again, one of the dates has to have a shavar pruta. Ad shehe ba'achrona shavar pruta. So we'll say, interestingly enough, what he means to say is, in that case of Osai, where Allah Kalamaisa is saying, bizu, ubizu, ubizu. Right, so therefore, again, we allow all of the dates to go ahead and total a pruta. So I will say, if halacha l'maisa, she's eating the dates as they come in, then in order to avoid a situation of being mekadishum b'halva with a loan, what has to happen? The last date given has to have an independent value of a shavar pruta. That's what has to happen in that case over there. Pretty interesting. Amarava, Shmami Nami Rabbi Ami Tla. So we learn from the Ami statement three things. So so by the way, and that seems to be the way that the Gemara is interpreting the Mishnah. So so bottom line, what we have in the Mishnah now is really three cases, or 2.5 cases. Case number one, Reuven goes over to Rachel, says, Hariat Mikudesh Asli B'Tam Razu, Hariat Mikudesh Asli B'Tam Razu, Hariat Mikudesh Asli B'Tam Razu. What's the halacha? The dates do not combine. Since they are separate transactions, in order for the Kiddushin to work, one of those dates has to be independently worth a pruta. Case one. Case two. Hariat Mikudesh Asli B'Tam Razu, Ubezu, 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 Ubezu. Here Mikudesh with this date and this date and this date. What's the halacha in that case? What's the halacha in that case? They combine. Now, we'll say, there's another take on case number two. What happens if as the dates are coming in, she's eating them one by one as they come in? So in that case, the Mishnah says that what? That works as long as one of them is worth a pruta. Now Rabbi Ami says, now which one has to be worth a pruta? We'll say, which one? The last one. The last one given has to be independently worth a pruta. Why, we'll say? Because here's what the problem is. If the first one is the pruta date, and she's eating it, or someone other than the last one is the pruta date, then I will say, essentially, if she's becoming mikudeshes with that, then halacha l'maisa, that has the status of a halva, of a loan, because the truth is the Kiddushin is not complete until the final date is given. So if if halacha l'maisa, one of the previous ones is the pruta one, then she's becoming Kiddushin with a loan. So therefore, if she's consuming the dates as they come in, that Kiddushin will only work if halacha l'maisa, the last date was worth a pruta. Beautiful. So now it says the Gemara. Learn three things from Rabbi Ami's statement. Number one, that if you're Mekadeshim with a loan, that doesn't work. We'll say we've seen that already before. In other words, to say it a little bit differently, loan forgiveness doesn't work by Kiddushin, right? Let's say again, Rachel owes Reuven $1,000, right? And he says to her, you know what? Keep the loan and become a Kudesh. That does not work. We saw that before already, because again, the borrower is already considered to be the owner, so to speak, of the loan money. So therefore, again, it's not viewed as if Reuben is giving her anything. Next, if a man is mekadesh a woman with both a halva, a loan, and a pruta, her das is on the pruta and not on the halva. That's the date case. On the days, now, both say this is going to be our next sugya, which is great. We'll say what you also see is what? Let's say a man is mekadesh a woman with something, but it turns out that it never worked. In other words, either it wasn't shava pruta or some reason other transaction it doesn't work. So what do you do? I will say with kiddushin money that didn't affect kiddushin. What's the halacha? They go back to the husband. And I will say, or they go back to the man. In other words, we'll say, we're going to see cases like this in just a moment, that Allah Chalamaysa, again, Reuven gives Rachel an item of value, but for whatever the reason, it never quite measures up to a pruta. So I will say, now Rachel is in possession of this money that didn't affect Kiddushin. So what happens to that money? Well, we're going to see, you could say, well, maybe Reuven wants her to have it as a gift. No. He doesn't. Right? He wanted it for Kiddushin. If it doesn't work for Kiddushin, then what happens to the money? The money goes back, ultimately, again, to Reuven. That's what we learn. That's what we glean from these cases over here. And we'll say, so 3 interesting conclusions. Number 1, they can't be Mekadesh woman with halva, which we've already seen. Number 2, when a Kiddushin transaction has both a halva and a pruta, her das is on the pruta, not on the halva, which makes sense because halva can't affect Kiddushin. And conclusion number 3 is that when money is given, but it doesn't end up affecting Kiddushin, the money is given back to Reuven, to the man, under those circumstances. Now, I will say, along those same lines, watch this next piece. Idmar, great case. Hamakadesh achoso. Listen to this. Man is Mekadesh his sister. Okay. Now, I will say, now, remember, we're always operating under the assumption that a man is not being Mekadesh his sister. Right? He's not being his sister, and every person knows that you cannot marry your sister. Right? We know that. So we'll say, so now, what's the shayla? So what is the status of the transaction? Again, we'll say, this is not a question of does the kiddushin work. Everyone knows the kiddushin doesn't work. Right? That's not it. The shayla is, what happens to the money when you know that Reuven is giving Mo's Kiddushin to his sister. Reuven is a normal guy. He has no intention to marry his sister. He knows he can't marry his sister. What's the status of the money given? Watch this. Rav Amar, Mo's Chozim. Says the money goes back. Okay, give money back to Reuven. Shmuel Amar, Mo's Matana. Oh. Shmuel says, no, the money's a gift. So what's the machol? It's Rav Amar, Mo's Chozrim. Rav says the money goes back to Reuven. Why? Adam Yodeh Shem Kiddushin Tovsin Ba'achoso. The Gamar v'nasan l'shum pikadon. Because I will say, everyone knows he can't marry his sister. So why did Reuven give the money to his sister? Really, he's giving her a pikadon. He wants her to watch something for him. Right? He's giving her a pikadon. Watch over this for me. And therefore, again, it's a pikadon. So why don't you just give it to her as a pikadon, right? It's a lot less awkward, right? So why not say, hey sis, can you do me a favor and just watch this for me? I will say, what's the issue? Savar lo makabla. Right? Ultimately, again, he's concerned that she doesn't want to accept responsibility, ultimately, again, for a pikadon. Right? So she's not going to accept it. It's interesting cheshbon over here. Right? So she's not going to accept a pikadon, but I guess if he says her at nikudeshas liba ma'ozu, she'll accept that. Because maybe she thinks he's joking around, whatever it is. So he has a better chance of getting her to watch the pikadon if he gives it to her as kiddushin, than ultimately, again, if he gives it to her as a pikadon. Shmuel says, ma'os matana. No, the money given is a matana. Why? Adam yodeh shein kiddushin tovsim ba'achoso. A man knows that he can't marry his sister. The gamar v'nas l'shum matana. He's giving his sister a gift, but he's framing the gift ultimately again as kesef kiddushin. The name of l'shum matana. Why don't you just tell your sister you're giving her a gift? Savar kasif alei milsa. I will say he thinks it's going to be embarrassing for her. So we'll say, so this approach actually resonates a bit more. He wants to give his sister money. He wants to give his sister a gift. He knows that she's going to be embarrassed to go and accept the gift. So what does he do? What does he do? Essentially, he makes a joke out of it. Right? Right? So he gives her the money. This is a more, I guess, a more like jocular way for him to get her the money, which borders on the absurd. But like this saves her dignity. It's quite actually. They both say it's actually like goes from awkward to being actually quite beautiful. I still don't think the preferred way, like to give a sibling a gift, but nevertheless, again, I will say, sometimes, just kind of making things a bit absurd allows people to, just in the absurd, you're able to go out and do things that normally, again, would not work in the normal world. So again, he's drawing on a little bit of absurdity in order to go out and give his sister this gift. Maser Ravina, so Ravina said, "Hamafrish chalaso kemach eno chala." So what's an interesting case here? Let's at least begin this today. Sisters will say the halacha is chala, right? You have to give chala to a kohen. Even today, we'll say we're still mafresh chala. Obviously, don't give it to kohanim, but there's still mafresh chala. But the halacha is you separate challah from dough. What happens if a person went ahead and separated out challah from kemach? Ultimately, again, from flour. So what happens in such a situation like that? So we'll say, mafresh challah so kemach. So I separate out challah from my flour. So inu challah, it's first not an effective challah separation. The gezel biyad kohen. And if I give it to the kohen, it's like theft in the hands of the kohen. Meaning, I will say, the kohen has to give it back. Kohen has to give it back to me because it's not proper challah. So Gemara says, whoa, v'amai gezel biyad kohen. I got it. It's not proper challah because it was a challah separated out from dough, not from flour. But why does it have to be something stolen in the hands of the kohen? After all, neima adam yodeh she'in mafrishin challah kemach. Why don't you just say everyone knows that in general you don't separate out challah from flour? V'nasan l'shem matanos. We'll say, why don't you just say like this? Just like we saw before by Shmuel. Everyone knows he can't marry your sister. So if Reuven gives his sister kesef kiddushin, how do we understand that? It's matana. So the same thing over here. Everyone knows that challah is from dough, not from flour. But if I separate out quote unquote challah from flour and I give it to the kohen, what am I really doing? I'm giving him a gift. Why don't we just say that? Shaindy Hazam denafik korba minei. Both said the concern over here is something catastrophic could occur. Namely what? Zimnin is the kohen pachos mi chamish rabam kemach va'ai alish le bahadi adadi v'kasar niskina isaso va'asei lemichla b'tivla. Should I both say ultimately? Again, remember a kohen. What am I concerned about? I'm concerned about say it like this. In order for a dough to be subject to the halachos of challah, ultimately again you have to have 5 1/4 kab. In other words, 1 1/4 kabim. Now, let's say of untithed dough. My concern over here is if the kohen gets this flour and he thinks that this is tithed flour, he mixes it in with other flour. Then what? And he has a mixture that is 1 1/4 kabim, but he thinks that it's not subject to any tithing responsibility. Because halacha l'maisa, he received flour from me that was already tithed, but you can't tithe flour. So ultimately, he's going to end up eating untithed dough, thinking that it's tithed. That's the concern over here. But you just said before that everyone knows that you can't separate out challah from flour. If that's the case, when the kohen gets it, he knows that it's not tithed, and he knows that he's getting a gift, so this concern shouldn't exist. Yodeh ve'eni yodeh. He knows it, but he doesn't know it. How so? Yodeh she'im mafresh challah kemach. Everyone knows that you don't separate out challah from flour. Ve'eni yodeh. We'll say what people don't know is the reason. Ve'eni yodeh. The savar tamayo ma'im mishum tircha de kohen. So we'll say people assume, why can't you separate out challah from flour? Because we'll say that's going to be a tircha for the kohen. Because now the kohen has to bake the flour into dough. So in order not to make things complicated for the kohen, rather give the kohen dough. So he has something that's ready to eat, or so to speak, ready to bake off and eat. But maybe if the kohen accepts flour, he's mochel on his tircha. So we'll say that's what people get confused about. So everyone knows you don't give challah from dough. What people don't know is why that is. People think it's just about the tircha of the kohen. Well, if the kohen accepted it, then he's mochel on the tircha, and therefore it should be fine. And then the concern does in fact kick in. What's going to happen? The kohen is now going to take this flour that he thinks is tithed, mix it in with other flour, think that it exempts the whole mixture because he hasn't reached the requisite threshold, and he's going to end up eating untithed produce. So we'll say, but let it just be true. I will say, no, tough to stop over here for today. We'll pick up Amiras Hashem in the middle of this. So we'll say, really, really interesting case over here. And remember, all going about essentially, what the Gemara is really grappling with over here is, what do you do with money? What do you do with money given for a transaction that everyone knows doesn't work? That's the fundamental issue. So is it just money that has to be returned, or like Shmuel, it's given as a matana, and we're just bringing up the parallel case over here of where someone gives something to a Kohen that they know doesn't work. What's the status ultimately of that flour? That's just to be continued tomorrow. We'll say, Shkoyach. All right, Chavra Zoom, have a great day, everyone.